maybe we should review what it is that Descartes has achieved. Remember that his criteria for knowledge, that is, in order for one of his beliefs to count as a piece of knowledge, it must satisfy the criteria of being clear and distinct. And one topic for Cartesian scholarship certainly is what is entailed by the idea of a clear and distinct idea. The Latin clarus and distinctus suggests something like forceful and well-defined. However, all we really have to go on is the paradigm case of a piece of knowledge, which was the cogito ergo sum. That's as clear as it gets. Okay? So if that is our example of a clear and distinct idea, we certainly are entitled to ask whether the subsequent moments in which he appeals to the concept of clarity and distinctness hold up to the precedent set by the cogito. Okay. One of the moments in which he employs this notion of clarity and distinctness is when he asserts the principle of efficient causality, which again states that an effect cannot surpass the reality of its own cause. And he uses this principle, which he understands clearly and distinctly, to demonstrate that the idea he possesses of God as an infinitely perfect idea demands an infinitely perfect cause. Therefore, leading him to conclude that God must exist. And once he has the existence of God, and from the fourth meditation, a strategy for avoiding error, then the demon is no longer an obstacle that cannot be overcome. Because so long as Descartes suspends the will until the intellect grasps an idea clearly and distinctly, then he can avoid falling into error. Okay? And it was necessary in the fourth meditation that Descartes find a way to take the blame for his own errors in judgment off of God and place it on himself. Because the idea of an infinitely perfect creator is incompatible with anything less than a creation which is perfect according to its own kind. Okay? So we have been created, according to Descartes, in such a way that if we use our faculties correctly, we can achieve perfection in judgment. Okay? All right. So what does he know thus far? Obviously, he knows that he exists. And he is a thinking thing, a mental substance. He understands the difference between substance and accident. The substance of a thing is its reality. It is that which exists independently of changes to appearance, and also independently of other types of substances. And that will become important once he demonstrates that material substance also exists. To say that mind is a mental substance and body is a material substance means that each can exist independently of the other. Obviously, bodies can exist without minds. There's an example in the chair. The chair has no mind. But the more interesting question, of course, is whether our minds can exist independently of our bodies. Can my personal consciousness survive the death of my body? And if mind and body are really distinct, as Descartes has set out to prove from the beginning, it would follow that, indeed, I can survive the death of my body. Okay? But we haven't gotten there yet. He knows that he exists, and he is a thinking thing, meaning a mental substance. So that while the mental substance is capable of different modes of thinking, such as sensing or imagining, doubting, etc., it remains the same mind to which all of these modes of thinking belong. Okay? So even though I think now about one idea and now about another idea, because the thinking thing, or the thing doing this thinking, is substantial, it remains the same mind, even though it entertains different thoughts. So in some sense, the modes of thinking of which the mind is capable are akin to the various accidents that the wax is capable of supporting. The wax stays the same thing despite changes to its appearance, and I remain the same person despite my changing ideas. Okay? But he still does not know whether there is such a thing as body. For all he knows at this point, the entire seemingly physical world is just an appearance of physicality. He has not yet found an argument in support of the existence of material things. He began to look for one in the third meditation by classifying his ideas, but he got sidetracked when he discovered that the principle of efficient causality could be employed as a proof for God's existence. And the same thing happens here in the fifth meditation. He begins the fifth meditation by saying, I still need to demonstrate that material things exist. So let us once again return to the idea of a material thing and ask, what is contained in that idea? And is there any basis given that idea for concluding that it is caused by actual material things? He begins by drawing a distinction which of course is not new in Descartes, but really goes back at least as far as Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, but really back to the ancient philosophers, and that is this distinction between essence and existence. Okay? This is such a fundamental distinction in philosophy. I think it's been said that if you grasp nothing other than this distinction, then you've made some headway into understanding what it means to think philosophically. What is the difference between essence and existence? We've spoken of the essence of things before. We've said that the essence of the thinking thing is thinking. What makes the mental substance the very thing that it is thinking. Likewise, I could say that the essence of a triangle is to be a three-sided closed figure lying in a plane consisting of precisely 180 degrees. And that would come pretty close to exhausting the essence of a triangle. Okay? That's what it essentially is to be a triangle. Now, I can paint the triangle, okay, or alter the relationship of its angles such that this one is equilateral, this one is a right triangle. But those changes are non-essential. They are accidental. Okay? What is essential is that I've got three angles, a closed figure, totaling 180 degrees. Okay? So the essence of something is that which makes a thing the very thing that it is. It is the characteristic which distinguishes one kind of thing from another kind of thing. When it comes to geometrical shapes, it is very easy to define their essences because it is a mathematical essence. And in general, it's easy enough to talk about the essence of artifacts, things that we make for certain purposes, like a chair. I can say that the essence of a chair is a piece of furniture for an individual person to sit in, or something like that, okay? Even though some chairs might be cloth, others are leather, some are upright, some recline, okay? But the point here is this: even though I can define the essence of some idea, it does not follow that there is such a thing existing in the world which exemplifies that idea. So I can tell you, for example, or suggest that the essence of a mermaid is a being that is part woman, part fish. But it does not follow that any mermaid exists. Okay? So you understand the difference between essence and existence. The essence of a triangle is 180 degrees in three angles. But it does not follow that any triangles actually exist anywhere in the universe. And the fact that it may be at some point that no triangle exists in the physical universe does not alter the essence of a triangle, because that essence is eternal. Descartes says, once again, that he clearly and distinctly understands that whatever he clearly conceives as belonging to the essence of some idea really does belong to that idea. Okay? So, for example, he cannot possibly imagine a triangle lacking one of its three angles. He clearly and distinctly understands that by the concept of a triangle, he understands a shape consisting of three angles. Okay. Now, of course, he wants to apply this idea to his notion of material things, to see if there is anything contained in the idea of material things, or in the essence of a material thing, that could be the basis for concluding that material things actually exist. But before he gets to do so, he once again gets distracted and realizes that this distinction can be used again to demonstrate the existence of God. And so we have a second proof that God exists. And this is what we call an ontological proof for the existence of God. And it is a variation on an argument first devised in the 11th century by St. Anselm. We call it an ontological argument because it begins with an analysis of the essence of some idea. And on the basis of that analysis, concludes the existence of something which answers to that essence. Okay? Now remember, he has said that whatever he clearly and distinctly understands as belonging to the essence of one of his ideas must really belong to it. Okay? So, for example, he clearly understands that by the idea of a triangle, is included three angles and three sides and 180 degrees. Okay? Just as clearly as I understand that contained in the idea of a mountain is the idea of a valley. Because I can't separate the two. Once I've got the mountain, then I've also got the valley. It's just two sides of the same slope. Okay? Well, as we know, Descartes says I also have an idea of God. And this is, again, the idea of a being, the essence of which is infinite perfection. A being that is omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, supremely benevolent, eternal, self-existent, independent of and separate from the world, and in a word, a being whose essence is itself the unity of all possible perfections. Okay. But according to Descartes, existing is a property that makes something more perfect than it would be if it lacked existence. In other words, existence, according to Descartes, is a perfection, just like omniscience and omnipotence. So, if I were to begin enumerating the perfections belonging to God, and of course at this point we're talking about what is contained in the essence of his idea of God. Well, we've done this before. God is the being whose essence consists of every possible perfection. For example, omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, but also existence. Why might he say that existence is a perfection or a property that must belong to the essence of infinite perfection? That's a very practical answer. But I'm asking you, philosophically speaking.
Like the execution of the form in being perfect.
Now, the funny thing is, if you're thinking of Plato, okay, this is a good illustration of how, depending on one's metaphysical conception of things, perfection can mean very different things. Because for Plato, as soon as a thing exists in the world, it ceases to be perfect. Only ideas are perfect. Okay? Now, whether this is inconsistent with Descartes, I'm not sure, because after all, we do not conceive of God as existing in a physical way. Okay? We think of it rather as, at least Descartes thinks of God as an infinite mental substance, whereas we are finite mental substances. Okay? Well, let me help you here. Which is better? The ice cream cone that I'm imagining, or the one that I can hold in my hand and eat?
Your imagination.
Is it?
Well, it depends.
Let me give you a different example. If I need to write on the chalkboard, which is better? The piece of chalk I'm imagining and wish that I had, or a piece of chalk that I could actually hold and use?
The actual chalk.
Right. Okay? So going back to Anselm, the idea is that existing in the world is a property that makes something great or better. It's better to exist than not to exist. Okay? So if existence is a perfection, that is, if existence is a property which makes something perfect, or to put it alternatively, if lacking existence would be a deficiency that would render something imperfect, and he clearly and distinctly understands that by the idea of God, he means a being that lacks nothing, lacks no perfection, then it follows that existence belongs to the essence of his idea of God. Therefore, God must actually exist. Because I can no more separate the idea of existence from the essence of the idea of God than I can separate the three angles from the essence of the idea of a triangle. Or I can separate the idea of a valley from the idea of a mountain. It can't be done. I cannot think a mountain without also thinking a valley. Likewise, Descartes claims he cannot possibly think an infinitely perfect being without also thinking that such a being possesses the property of existence, because existence belongs to the essence of that idea. Now, the most famous objection to this argument or one of the two most famous objections is that of Immanuel Kant. Now, we've yet to study Kant, and we're preparing for it. But Kant simply says this: existence is not a perfection. You cannot include existence in a list of perfections. Omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence, supreme benevolence, eternality, these are perfections. But existence is a different category of thing altogether.
I'm confused right now.
Okay? In other words, if you ever watched Sesame Street, okay, you might have seen this little skit. They sing the song, "Which of these things just doesn't belong here?" Right? And it may do something like this. In this square, there's a triangle. Here's a circle. Here's a square. And, here's, well, I can't represent it, but let's just say they draw the color blue. Okay? Which of these things doesn't belong here? Well, blue belongs to a different category or classification than these things do. It's not a shape. Kant is basically saying that omniscience, omnipotence, omnipresence are perfections, but existence is not. Existence is a different mode. It's a modal term. It is not a perfection.
Well, could you say that God's essence to exist, and because of his existence, therefore, hence comes this perfection? But he can't. But because of that, he didn't add existence to his perfectness. You get what I'm trying to say?
I almost have no idea what you're trying to say.
I don't know how else to say it, but I'm just saying that essence could be existence could be under essence, but then that's two different categories, and then comes all those perfect things, omnipotent, omnipresent, but it's not really with existence, but because existence is with essence. It's
Tell me what he's saying.
Did you put it in other words?
I don't think so.
Okay.
He's just saying that it's a part.
What is a part of what?
Well, existence is a part of, without, speaking of God, he's saying that because he knows all of these things, there has to be something that exists. It's kind of like a form. So existence is part of an essence.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. I'm not sure that's what he's saying.
Oh, okay.
Here's what Descartes is saying, okay? That if when I say the word God, the idea that comes to your mind is the idea of a being that is all-knowing and all-powerful etc., but doesn't actually exist, then you are not actually thinking of the infinitely perfect being, because a being which exists is superior to a being that does not exist. Okay? Well, let me give you the other major objection to this argument, which I don't particularly think works, but I'll let you make your own judgment. This is the objection given by Gaunilo, okay, who says Descartes, or actually Anselm, since he was objecting to Anselm's version of the argument, I can use this argument to prove the existence of anything, even things we know don't exist. So if I can use the very same argument to demonstrate the existence of something known not to exist, then there must be something wrong with the argument. Consider this. I can say I have an idea of an infinitely perfect island. Okay? Perfectly clean, powdery sand, perfect temperature, never a cloud in the sky, just the right amount of humidity, okay? Everything that would go into the idea of a perfect island. And of course, an island which exists and has all those characteristics would be superior to an island which doesn't exist. Therefore, the perfect island must exist. But we know it doesn't, because you can always imagine something more perfect. Right?
That's where I was going with the ice cream.
Okay. Here's what I deem to be the problem with that argument. And that isn't to say I think that Descartes' argument is any good. Okay? But I'm just talking about this counter argument. When Descartes says that I cannot separate the predicate of existence from the subject of God. Okay? The reason is because God's perfection is infinite perfection. In other words, all possible perfections belong essentially to the idea of God. But if I'm talking about an island, or a desk, or an ice cream cone, those things only possess the perfections appropriate to the kind of things that they are. Okay? So, my idea of, let's say, a perfect hammer is, one that is weighted properly and is easy to handle and has, enough weight to drive nails and doesn't break, under extreme circumstances and so forth. And those would be the kinds of perfections belonging to my idea of a perfect hammer. But I wouldn't say that having the ability to fly belongs to my idea of a perfect hammer, because that's the property that would belong to a different kind of thing, like a bird. Only in the case of the idea of God is it a contradiction to say that it lacks any perfection. Only the infinitely perfect being must possess every possible perfection, not just those perfections appropriate to a specific kind of thing. So I could describe a perfect piece of chalk, and it would, I would enumerate things like, being able to handle it, long enough to be able to handle it and for it to make legible marks on the board and easily transportable and inexpensive and that kind of thing. But that doesn't, I don't include perfections like tasting good, okay? It is only in the case of my idea of the infinitely perfect being in which it is necessary that I include every possible perfection. So again, the question is it more perfect to exist than not to exist? And depending on how you interpret Plato, if existence means existence in the visible world, then it is less perfect to exist. But of course, God is pure intellect. Okay, so when I say that God exists, I mean as a spiritual agency, not as a physical being. Okay. But what's important for you to understand here is simply Descartes' argument itself. Okay? It is an ontological or quasi-ontological proof. Quasi means unorthodox. Okay? It is a near ontological proof because it begins with an analysis of the essence of an idea and shows that belonging to the essence of that idea is some property that is necessary. And in the case of the idea of God, it is necessary that its essence contain all possible perfections. So I can no more separate the idea of a valley from the idea of a mountain than I can separate the idea of existing from the idea of God. Because if I'm imagining or if I'm conceiving of a being that is all-knowing and all-powerful and supremely good, but doesn't exist, then that isn't a perfect being. You're thinking of some other kind of being. Yes.
Could you maybe, I understand that concept. What is existence outside of the concept of God? What is the definition of existence?
Okay.
Rather than being essence.
Right. The difference between essence and existence is this. The essence of something is what must be included in a description of that thing. Okay? So I could describe to you, for example, what an animal must possess in order to count as a dinosaur, okay? And let's say I did that in terms of its genetic code or something. It does not follow that there are any dinosaurs, right? Okay. So to say that something exists means that there is something in the world that answers to the concept defined by the essence of its idea. Okay? So, even though I clearly understand that by a Pegasus, I understand a mythical being that is part horse, part man. Yeah? Or does it have wings? I can't remember.
Wings.
It has wings. Okay.
Centaur.
Centaur. Right. It doesn't follow that there are any centaurs. It doesn't mean that there is anything in the world that exemplifies that concept. Okay? I know what a piece of chalk is, but I could easily imagine a world in which there are no more pieces of chalk. They've all been used up and nobody makes any more because they've been phased out. Everybody's gone to, you know, dry erase or whatever. It's just chalk doesn't exist anymore. Okay? I still understand what it means to be a piece of chalk. There simply isn't anything in the world that can answer to the concept. Okay? And that's what we mean by exemplifying a concept. An exemplar is something which exists according to an idea.
So, our existence, we have that perfection, we're just not perfect in any other way. Would we share that same perfection that God shares as far as existence goes? No.
No, because there's, you know, again, first of all, it would be very, you know, it is very difficult to define exactly what a human being is to begin with, okay? And in fact, it's probably, I would probably argue that belonging to the essence of a human being is imperfection. Okay? So, certainly, my idea of a human being is not the idea of a being that possesses every possible perfection. It is just the idea of a being that possesses certain qualities. You know, whether it's a genetic code or whatever, however you want to define a human being. But certainly, I can still understand what it means to be a human being, even if I can't say that, even if there were no human beings, because if there were no human beings, then I couldn't understand anything, because I wouldn't exist, okay? But you understand what I mean. There's no necessity that a thing exists simply because I understand what is contained in the essence of the idea of that sort of thing, except for this one idea, the idea of an infinitely perfect being. Yes?
And that's what I'm still confused about, because I feel like of those qualities, existence doesn't belong there, only because I would feel that the idea of God transcends the idea of existence, right? Because everything exists because of this perfect being. So why is it, you know, that,
yeah. Right. That's very clever. You know, when we think of something existing, we tend to think of it existing physically. You know? I mean, of course, I can say, hey, I'm imagining, you know, some kind of thing that doesn't actually exist, but my idea still exists. It exists in my mind, right? But that's not really what we mean by it. I mean, when we use the term existence in ordinary language, we mean that the thing is in the world, that it is in the public domain. Because I wouldn't say that, you know, if I have a dream about some kind of monster, I wouldn't say that that monster exists. I would say that the dream existed. Okay? And within the dream, the monster existed, but that's a very different thing than saying it exists in the world. Okay? But I like your idea because For one thing, if belonging to the idea of God is eternality, all right? First of all, let's understand what that means. Eternality does not just mean existing forever in both temporal directions. That's what I mean by immortality. Because I might have always existed and continue always to exist, all right? But by God's eternality, we not only mean that there has never been a time when God did not exist because God existed before there was time, but that once God creates the universe and there is time, all times are present to the mind of God simultaneously. Okay? We don't mean that God exists from moment to moment and just always has and always will exist. We mean that God exists in an eternally present moment, or an eternal presence, which of course is itself already a violation of the concept of eternality, because the present gets defined in terms of the past and the future. And God has no past or future, because he exists outside of time. Time doesn't begin until there is a universe. And the idea of God, at least the theistic idea of God, and by that I mean the idea of God belonging to the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition. Okay? This God is self-existent, which means he does not create himself, because that doesn't make any sense. I can't create, a thing can't create itself unless it already exists in order to create itself. So, if God is eternal in the sense just described and creates the universe ex nihilo, from nothing, okay? In other words, before God created the universe, there was nothing else but the Spirit of God. Okay? Then there would be nothing against which to compare the concept of existence. There would be no notion of existing versus not existing, because there was never anything which ceased to exist. Prior to the creation of the universe, nothing existed, nor did anything fail to exist. Because non-existence is not a possibility belonging to God. God is a necessary being, or at least the idea of God is the idea of a being that logically cannot fail to exist. Okay? So if it is impossible for God not to exist, then it doesn't really make sense to say that God exists either. God simply is. Now, that is hinting at the difference between metaphysics and ontology. In metaphysics, we ask about what sorts of things exist and what their reality consists in. As ontologists, we are asking about what it means to be at all. Okay? a metaphysician will ask, what is X really? As opposed to how X merely appears to be. What does the reality of something consist in? Okay? What does it really mean to be a person? What does it really mean to be courageous? What does it really mean to be beautiful? And so forth. Okay? But as ontologists, we're not asking about the thing, we're asking about the is. We're asking, what do I mean when I say something is? Okay?
Looked up the definition. It says the metaphysical study of the nature of being and existence.
Doesn't. To say that ontology is the metaphysical study of something reduces ontology to metaphysics.
Yeah.
And they are two separate things. But, of course, at this level, that is a very sophisticated question. And we're not really in a position to appreciate the difference yet. Metaphysicians, or I should say metaphysics, is a type of philosophical questioning that attempts to distinguish appearance from reality. Ontology is the philosophical questioning which attempts to distinguish between being and non-being. Okay? Which means ontology is a deeper science. Because, after all, if a child wakes up from a dream upset and you say, don't worry, it was only a dream, it wasn't real. Okay? It only appeared to be real while you were asleep. That doesn't mean that the dream was nothing. Right? The dream still has some status. We're still talking about it. As a metaphysician, I want to know what the being of particular kinds of beings consists in. What does it mean to be this kind of thing versus that kind of thing? As an ontologist, I want to know what it means to be at all. What is it that this, that, and everything else has or possesses such that I say that it is rather than not? Maybe another way of distinguishing it is to say that metaphysics presupposes or takes for granted the existence of a universe and seeks to understand the real inner nature of that universe. Whereas ontology is interested in why there is anything at all rather than not. But they are very, they are too close for us to worry too much about in an introductory course. Okay. So what we still have to tackle is the existence of a material world. Descartes hasn't shown yet that there is a physical world. At this point, he is still trapped in his own mind. He knows he's having the experience of what seems to be a world of physical things, but he hasn't proven that those things exist outside of his mind. Okay? And that suggests a concept which we must begin to think about called representationalism. Okay? Representationalism is an epistemological model whereby truth means a correspondence between what I think the world is like and what the world is really like. Okay? So, I see the clock. You see the clock. The clock is represented to our minds. It is out there. But our experience is in here. Okay? So what Descartes has yet to show is that what we believe to exist out there in the world and to exist more or less in the way that we believe it to exist does exist. Because at this point, all he has shown is that he himself must exist, and to his satisfaction that God must exist, but he hasn't put the pieces together yet in order to show that the physical world exists independently of his idea of it. Okay? Because at this point, he's not in a position to say that should he cease to have an experience of the world, that the world would continue to exist. So far, all he knows is that he has an idea of what seems to be a world populated by material things, but he hasn't given an argument for that yet. And once he does establish that there is a material world, then he has to make good on his original promise included in the title of the work, that mind and body are really two separate kinds of things, that there's a real distinction between mind and body. Okay? Remember, he's attempting to show that knowledge is possible by providing a firm foundation to build such knowledge upon. And he began with establishing the existence of his own mind. And belonging to his mind is an idea of God. Now, from that idea of God, he found a way to prove the existence of God. And with the existence of God and his strategy for avoiding error, found in the fourth meditation, he can now provide an argument for the existence of a material world. Okay? But he has yet to do that. But you see, once he does, once he establishes what it takes to know something for certain, and that those criteria are satisfied in the case of the existence of a material world, then we can proceed to do science. Because we know that we're actually describing something that exists, and that the mathematics we use to describe it are reliable. Because it's not possible that there is an evil genius deceiving me about that which I clearly and distinctly understand. He hasn't explicitly told us why yet, but the answer is because if God exists and is by definition morally perfect, he would not create me in such a way that when I use my faculties properly, I couldn't avoid falling into error. Okay? So, if I use my faculties correctly and clearly and distinctly see the truth of some mathematical proposition which describes the nature of the physical world, then I have provided a foundation upon which the science of physics can proceed. Okay? All right.